You're listening to Nutrition Matters podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist. Hey everyone, it's Paige, your favorite nutrition podcaster and dietitian. Nutrition Matters podcast explores what really matters in nutrition and health with a sensitive and realistic approach. This podcast relies on the support of listeners like you and needs donations to keep this project running. To help support the podcast, please consider making a donation at pagesmothersrd.com/podcast. If you find this episode interesting, engaging, or helpful in your life, please consider donating, sharing with friends and family, and leaving a review on iTunes. You can leave a review about this podcast straight from your podcast app. Search Nutrition Matters Podcast, click Reviews, and then write a review. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Paige Smathers RD if you'd like to have a little more food for thought. Thank you for listening. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Nutrition Matters Podcast. As you know, my name is Paige and I'm your host, and as always, I'm just super excited to share this conversation with you. So today I'm speaking with my good friend named Katherine, who is a registered dietitian in Salt Lake City in private practice. And today we're talking about this idea of radically respecting your body and a radically respectful approach to nutrition and health. And before I get into that and explaining who she is and what she does, I just want to take a minute to make sure that you know about a few things that are available to you. One is the Facebook group for Nutrition Matters Podcast listeners. So you just type Nutrition Matters Podcast into Facebook and request to join the group. We would love to have you there and to have you be part of the discussion. And then, as always, I would always love an online review from you if you have a few minutes on iTunes. And then I did want to tell you about my online course, which is called Educate, Embrace, Empower: How to Unlock Your Inner Wisdom and Become Your Own Eating Expert. So this is a 10-week online course that is taught by me, and I walk you through how to, instead of taking one giant leap of faith, so to speak, into intuitive eating, I kind of take you through those stepping stones to each step feeling kind of comfortable and feeling like it makes sense based on the step before it, and building on the knowledge that you have and also the experiences that you've had to eventually move toward this really healthy, happy relationship with food and your body. And the best part is you get lifetime access to the course, plus the online Facebook group that we do in association with the course, where I pop in each week and do a lot of discussion and question and answers. So progress doesn't need to stop after the course ends. So if you're at all interested in that, check it out at pagesmothersrd.com/course. And with that, let me just tell you a little bit about Katherine. Katherine is a registered dietitian nutritionist who specializes in eating disorder treatment, intuitive eating, weight concerns, and also family and childhood feeding dynamics. Her counseling approach is very consistent with the models of intuitive eating and also the Health at Every Size model. So the reason I'm really having Katherine on the podcast is because one of the things that she talks about on her website is that she just has this radical respect for the body's innate mechanisms for being able to sustain life and maintaining balance. And she comes at health and nutrition from this perspective that's very similar to mine, where we both really strongly believe that our bodies are very good at communicating their needs to us, as long as we learn to pay attention and learn to kind of get rid of all of that dieting noise that's in our minds from past attempts at dieting, or even just from being socialized in our culture that's so size obsessed. And she's just a phenomenal person to talk to about these issues. I love getting together with her and talking about some of the hard issues within our world of nutrition and intuitive eating and health at every size. And she's just such a strong advocate for the idea that all bodies are worthy of love and compassionate self-care, regardless of size, shape, or ability. And, all of us can start where we are to be the best people we can be. So with that, one thing I also wanted to tell you is that this is my very first interview I've ever done for the podcast that was done in person. So that was a lot of fun, a little bit of a different dynamic. And so let's get on into the interview. So I'm so excited to share this episode with you. Katherine is actually a good friend of mine, someone who I hang out with outside of work, and I just think the world of her, and we love to talk about these issues together. And I'm so excited for you to hear her approach and for you to hear her voice. She is powerful and dynamic and strong and just an amazing person. And so, yeah, let's get on to listen to the episode. Well, hey, Katherine, I'm so excited to have you on Nutrition Matters podcast. This is the very first time I've been in person with someone while I interviewed them. So this is a bit different for the recording process, not different for the listeners, but this is fun.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
So for the listeners, Katherine is a registered dietitian in private practice in Salt Lake City, which some of you might know that's where I am too. And so we're friends in real life and colleagues, and we love to talk about all these nutrition issues together, and we wrestle over them together. And she's just one of my favorite people to get together with and talk about work and talk about family and all kinds of different things. So this is fun to have a formal conversation where we're going to be sharing it with a larger audience today. But yeah, so Katherine, thanks so much for being here and welcome. And let's get on into talking about the topic for the day. So when you asked me to kind of take a look at your website when you're getting things up and running, one of the big things that stood out to me in the words on your website was this phrase, radically respectful nutrition therapy. And I gave you the feedback like, oh, I'm just obsessed with that. I love that. I think that's such a great idea. And so let's start there. Let's talk about why that's sort of your way of describing the way you approach nutrition therapy. Tell me about that.
Sure. So when I think about a radically respectful approach, I'm kind of talking about two different things. The first being that I just have this immense respect and admiration for the human body and how sophisticated it is in its ways of keeping us alive. There are just thousands and thousands of physiological mechanisms that we are not even aware of on a daily basis that just do this spectacular job of maintaining homeostasis in our body, and that includes keeping our heart beating and our breathing rates and maintaining the proper pH in our blood within a really tight range, and just all these incredible things that our body's doing all the time to keep us alive and thriving. And that also includes, as dietitians, we see folks who are concerned about their weight. And I also believe that our body works really hard to maintain what is an ideal optimal body weight for our bodies, and that we don't get to decide that. So in my nutrition therapy approach, it's really very much based on respecting what the body decides it needs, as opposed to me as the nutrition professional deciding how much a particular body should weigh or what a particular person should be eating. I really prefer to take my cues from the body. And so I see my job as more of helping the client interpret the signals that the body is sending so that we can really best determine how to meet the needs of the body.
Okay, so I know you're gonna get to your second reason for the radically respectful, but I want to hit on that one before we talk about the next, because I love that approach where any potential client of yours knows that that's the fundamental way you're going to approach any questions about shoulds and shouldn'ts and good and bad and right and wrong with food, and just really kind of put that on the total back burner, or even not talk about that, but really talk about just how do we come at all of the questions about our bodies and about feeding them and taking care of them from this angle of let's respect our body and have awe for it. And I think there's areas of self-care that are easier than others to be radically respectful about, such as, okay, this is going to sound really stupid, but, we maybe not radically respectful about this, but maybe just the idea of we never even think twice about, one day we might go pee 10 times and another day we might only go pee 4 times. And we never think that that's just so weird, or we're never mad at ourselves for, or our bodies like, why did you make me go so many times today? Or why did you make me only go 4 times today? Like, it's just like this non-issue. And there's areas of life, I guess what I'm thinking is there's areas of health and self-care and wellness that are sort of easier to respect and or not give a second thought to. Food tends to be so wrapped up in body image, which is wrapped up in your sense of self-worth and your sense of your place in this world and all of these other really messy, entangled issues. And I think that's why it becomes so difficult to be respectful of your body's cues of hunger and fullness and what sounds good and what seems appetizing and all of that. But really, we're born with that kind of innate in us, which I think is so cool to be able to try to not really relearn something new, but maybe uncover something you already know, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it involves a lot of unlearning.
Yeah, that's so true.
that we've picked up along
maybe
the
less
way.
Learning, more unlearning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That it's a very countercultural idea that we can really trust the signals that our body is sending us, and rather there's this hugely strong cultural message from folks that we should be able to trust, folks who are so-called experts in public health and medicine and healthcare, who basically set up this embattled relationship with our bodies that we can't trust them, and that everything about what we do in terms of our health behaviors and our quote self-care is really about overcoming what our body is. If we're hungry, then we figure out ways to trick ourselves into not being hungry if we've already eaten, quote, too much, or if we've already eaten the amount that we're, quote, supposed to eat in a particular day. When, my belief, again, getting back to just respecting the body's wisdom about these things, our needs in terms of energy intake or calorie intake might be wildly different from day to day. And there's no way that we can apply this kind of external rules-based system of determining how much we're supposed to eat or how much we're going to eat that actually adequately or accurately meets the body's needs that might be changing so frequently. There's no way to apply those external rules to meet those needs when they're changing so rapidly.
Oh, yes, that's so true. And I think that's kind of what I was getting at with the peeing example. I know that's
exactly,
weird, but it's
sure.
like some days you go a lot and some days you don't go a lot. And some of that has to do with how much water you drink. Sometimes that has to do with absolutely not how much water you drank, but other factors, right? Where maybe you sweat a bunch that day and you never think twice about it and you're never mad at yourself. But I guarantee, Katherine, that if there was a bunch of guilt and shame around peeing, we would all have peeing disorders. You know what I mean? Right. Like, I feel like it's not out of the realm of possibility for anything to become super disordered when your whole entire sense of like where you belong and how you can connect with people and how you can love people is wrapped up in this particular area of self-care, And some just happen to be super automatic and intuitive. Others should be intuitive and connecting, but aren't. And that's sort of, I think we see things very, very similarly. That's sort of what we're just trying to do is kind of go with the cues of the body and allow it to be wise and sort of in charge, but sort of alongside some knowledge and some wisdom too that's gentle about nutrition principles. So tell us about that second reason why you relate to this idea of radical respect.
Right. So the second kind of way that I think about this is that I really strongly believe that each individual is the expert in his or her own life. And as such, anytime a client walks in my office, I guess as dietitians, we have this sort of reputation as, either, I don't know, being the food police or being these kind of know-it-all, judgy, I'm going to size up how you're eating and make my judgments about what you're doing wrong and what you're doing right. And a lot of that can also be tied up in a person's weight. And when a person is living in a larger body, or even if a person is living in a much slimmer body, there's a lot of judgment that gets flung around, in helping professions and in health professions and in the media and just in our social circles that people think they can really judge or criticize why a person is struggling with certain medical conditions or why a person weighs what he or she weighs. We think that we can just, clearly this person eats too much, or, by the same token, looking at a person in a much slimmer body and say, hey, come on, eat a sandwich. We hear those same sorts of judgments, when in reality, we really have no idea what is going on in a person's life. There are hundreds of factors that might be playing into whatever factor or feature it is that we're making this snap judgment about. And as a nutrition professional, I just feel really strongly that when a client comes into my office with whatever complaints or concerns or issues that they're struggling with, whether or not they are weight related, it's my job, it's my ethical obligation to have utmost respect for that person's lived experience and what is going on in that person's life that is leading to these concerns, so that rather than making this, well, clearly here are the things that you're doing wrong that are contributing to this concern that you're having, I really try and partner with the client to better understand that lived experience and to have respect for that lived experience, as well as the values that person is coming in the door with, and allowing those values to be that person's own values and priorities, and those are not always going to be the same thing. So I think that there's whether it's a kind of one-on-one provider-patient or provider-client relationship, or just in kind of the larger social landscape, that there's just so much judgment getting flung around. And, especially in the age of the internet, where people can kind of hide behind their screens and say really nasty things, that we're really just lacking this basic respect for other human beings and other individual experiences.
Okay, so to summarize the two reasons for radically respectful nutrition therapy, one is the radical respect for the body, and then the second is respect for the person's lived experiences, their values, and just their own particular situation. Right? Is that right? Mm-hmm. And something that really I love about that is that, I can really relate to going and seeing a doctor and saying, here's my issue, help me with this. It's taking over my life. And what comes to mind is my oldest child, she just did not sleep well. Like, she would wake up 10, 15, 20 times a night. And, you can handle that. You can handle the newborn phase for the newborn phase, but you can't really handle it when they're like 2, and when you've been doing that every night, you start to go insane. So I remember that 2-year-old checkup, I was like, so desperate. I probably had crazy eyes, like, help me. Why won't this child sleep? Like, give me some answers here. And his response, I know he meant well, but his response was so oversimplified. And he had to get out of the door, and he didn't really take time to hear what I had tried or what was going on or really learn the situation. He was just like, well, X, Y, and Z, do these things. And it's just like, that's not going to help. Or just tell me there's nothing I can do, but don't give me like a dumb answer that you haven't taken the time to really learn my situation. And the reason I bring that up is I think that's so often what well-intentioned health professionals in general do is, oh, okay, I see you walk in, you're in a larger body. Oh, okay, I make assumptions about why that is, and then I prescribe X, Y, and Z, some oversimplified nutrition prescription, basically, without taking the time to get to know, well, what about your culture? What about your values? What about how much time you have, or your cooking skills, or what about your other areas of self-care? How do you sleep? How do you manage stress? Like, let's talk about all those other things before we even start to talk or nitpick what you're eating, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think that's awesome. And I think that that's a really, really important approach, but it does require a lot of time.
It does.
And not every provider has time. We're lucky we do, right?
Well, and I think it's a discipline on our part as the providers in those scenarios to really keep in check our own tendencies to judge, you know, even as someone who is aware and thoughtful and intentional about this. I mean, you still catch yourself kind of drawing conclusions about somebody's story that you don't have that background, and you don't have that, again, that person's lived experience. And you're so right to bring up parenthood about it, because that, you know, opens up a whole huge can of worms in terms of judgment and people kind of watching what you're doing and seeing what your kids are doing, whether it's how they're sleeping or how they're eating or how they behave. And, you know, every kid is so different, and it's such a humbling experience to be a parent. I mean, you know, they say, I was a really great parent until I had kids.
I never heard that, but that is true.
It's so true, right? Because, you know, every kid is so unique and brings his or her own challenges, and I really just think that we have to respect that, and, you know, give each other the benefit of the doubt that, you know, your struggles are different than mine. I don't know your struggles because they're absolutely fundamentally unique. And, you know, I can't presume that I would do something different or that I would do something better than anybody else if I were in her shoes, because, you know, that's taking that respectful piece out of it. It's me just looking at a snapshot of your situation and sizing you up and criticizing and making those judgments.
Yeah. So I want to ask, why did you use the word radical, and what does that mean to you? I mean, radical will catch attention, that's for sure. But why is it radical to respect those two things you talked about?
Well, I think it comes back to that culture of judgment, and especially, I think, around, I mean, I guess this is what I do, so I'm more attuned to this than I might be to other realms in which this is relevant. But when it comes to health and nutrition and weight and appearance and all of these things, there's such this culture of judgment. And, you know, read any comment section on a HuffPost article about, you know, this sort of stuff, and you see the claws really come out. It's kind of the norm for people to draw these really fast, simple conclusions about, well, you know, it's not that hard, like looking at folks in larger bodies. Well, it's not that hard. You eat less and exercise more. Like, it's not rocket science. Like, this just really nasty, hateful, judgmental rhetoric around these things. And so I think both in the sense of, okay, first of all, let's give this individual or this kind of prototype this respect that, like, okay, wait a minute. It's clearly not that simple for this person. Like, probably this person has considered, you know, what sorts of things might go into a person's body size. Maybe that person living in this world wishes that he were in a different size body. More than likely that's the case. And more than likely there have been attempts to manipulate body size. And, you know, if you're a person who's in a naturally smaller body, it's very easy for you to say that it's not rocket science, you know, in this kind of critical way. But clearly, you know, if we look at our population of folks and the rate of attempted weight loss versus actual sustained weight loss, like it's not that simple. People, you know, spend their entire lives trying to manipulate their body size, and our bodies just don't like to be manipulated. They don't like to be forced to be something that they're not meant to be. So it's kind of a radical act to show that individual the respect that, okay, this is your experience. I'm not going to draw conclusions about how you even feel about your body. I'm not going to draw conclusions about what you have or have not done or want to do or want to engage in terms of lifestyle. I'm not going to impose my own agenda on your life because you're an individual and you're entitled to your own values and priorities and to your own lived experience. And I'm not going to come in and just make a snap judgment or criticism about that. And I think it's also a radical act to allow my body to be what it's meant to be and to not have an agenda to manipulate my body to look how the world thinks it's supposed to look, or on that same token, to impose that agenda on my clients to say, okay, yes, this is what you want your weight to be. Let's make that happen. Let's calculate X number of calories to cut, and or even if it's not that, that blatant, let's manipulate your eating in this way so that we can kind of naturally, with a lifestyle approach, bring your weight down to what we arbitrarily decide it's supposed to be. I think in our culture, that's a radical act.
I call it swimming upstream. I often feel like I'm swimming upstream when I'm lucky. I have a lot of really good friends who kind of understand who I am and how I approach this, and they aren't sort of that typical, let's all get together and talk about how much we hate our bodies and, how much we feel so guilty for eating these foods. I don't really have those friends. Yeah. I don't know if I'd do well if I did. Yeah. But even just existing in this world with really amazing friends and family who kind of get me, I still feel like I'm swimming upstream. And I do recognize that if I were in a different sized body, it would be even more difficult to exist in this world with that radical respect, because people would automatically assume like, oh, you must be dissatisfied, you must be intentionally trying to manipulate. And when you use that word manipulate in your last little comment, I made me think back. Sorry, I'm doing this pee example. We're just going to bring this analogy all the way through. But when you manipulate like a natural body function, like going to the bathroom, you can think about the consequences, like you will get a bladder infection, you might get a UTI, like you might get a full-blown kidney infection. Like your body does not appreciate manipulation. Your body appreciates heeding cues and doing what you need to do to take care of it. And again, it's so easy to see how any type of efforts to manipulate sleep, or to manipulate breathing in oxygen, or to manipulate any form of what we need to do to stay alive, it doesn't work out so well for us. So why do we think we can manipulate our body size with food? Now, you know what? Like, I think it's just important to say, like, some people's body sizes might shift or do shift throughout their life one way or another. And we're not saying that like your body is a permanent fixed thing that never changes. Like, both of us will recognize, even on a cellular level, your body's changing every single minute, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, it's not assuming or saying, okay, well, I'm going to look at a chart and say this is how much gravitational pull your body should have. Like, that's just totally bogus. And similar to trying to manipulate, something as natural as going to the bathroom.
Yet there's this cultural expectation that we all should be trying to manipulate our body size, and that no matter where you fall on the spectrum, the BMI spectrum or the size spectrum, however you think of it, we're always supposed to be working on improving something or changing or toning or fitting into whatever size. And it's just absolutely the conventional wisdom. That's the assumption, like you're talking about, this kind of theoretical group of friends that I don't really associate with either. Thankfully, don't have too much of that in my life, although, it's really so ubiquitous. It's hard to entirely avoid this assumption that we're all unhappy and that we're all just, fighting the tide of making our bodies something that that is just kind of always just a little bit out of reach. It's just kind of, and when you orient this way, when you orient this with this kind of acceptance that our bodies are what they are and they do what they do and they have this wisdom that we can't impose on them, it's kind of maddening to hear this rhetoric that just surrounds us all the time, that makes this assumption that we're always supposed to be fighting our bodies and that we're supposed to be, apologizing for having an appetite and for eating a cheeseburger at lunch if that's what we want to, there's this expectation of us in this culture that we should all be engaging in this battle with our bodies. And as someone who really rejects that, it's really kind of maddening to hear that.
That's actually one of the biggest pieces of feedback I get from podcast listeners is a lot of people will say, like, it's great to learn these things and to become aware and sensitized, but it's also sort of a burden because totally. You get freaking annoyed with, like, everyone in your life. You're like, why is everyone so clueless and annoying? Yeah, right. So, okay, I think most of the time when we come to some type of radical conclusion or we do something radical in our life, we're not like born with that knowledge, right? It's usually like an epiphany or a realization or like just something you come to in this miraculous, beautiful way. So I want to hear as much as you want to share. How did you, I think all dietitians who practice in this area, therapists, doctors, whoever, clinicians who practice sort of from a weight neutral, sort of gentle approach to all of this, we don't come out of school this way usually. It's not really in most programs to even speak of this one time. So tell us about that. How did you come to this radical respect idea?
Okay, well, so I came into dietetics as, well, not really a second career. It just sort of took me a while to find my first career. In my 20s, early in my 20s, I was diagnosed with a chronic illness, and I struggled with that for several years. And I experienced something that's very similar, I think, to what we were discussing earlier about how people address very critically and dismissively folks with weight concerns or folks in larger bodies. And that is in the sense that people, you see, if you're kind of sensitized to it, which I am, you really do see a lot of that same judgment and criticism when folks aren't kind of classically healthy. So, in other words, if you are struggling with some sort of chronic health issue that was really difficult to get under control medically. And I was interested in, along with that whole kind of health struggle, my weight actually fluctuated quite a bit. And that was sort of where my interest in nutrition came from originally. But I started to become aware of health professionals or my own healthcare providers. I was starting to get sort of interested in some of the alternative health and integrative health practices. And when kind of, conventional Western medicine wasn't really seeming to do the trick for me, I did kind of seek out some of those alternative modalities for treating chronic issues like this. And I was really fascinated by it, but I kind of always felt this frustration with not really ever quite knowing what was real and what was helpful. And at the end of the day, none of those modalities that I really did kind of give an honest, good long-term try really ended up helping me either. But in that circle, I really felt this judgment that, oh, well, I must just not have eliminated the right foods, or, oh, I must have just not tried the right alternative therapy, or, oh, I must have not really believed in what I was engaging in, or else it would have worked for me, so to speak.
So in other words, there was like, oh, if our recommendations aren't working, you're doing something wrong. Like the blame is sort of on you, like you're being lazy, or you're not putting the effort in, or you're clearly not eliminating the right food, and it just sort of starts to feel like, I'm sure, pretty exhausting and also frustrating that, and you internalize like, oh, there's something wrong with me. Not only do I have this chronic condition, but I'm also a total loser. I mean, I'm not calling you a loser, but that must have been how it felt.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy. I mean, the phrase that kind of sticks in my head that is kind of, I think it's applicable in this kind of realm as well as what we do as dietitians. There's this whole concept of a lifestyle change, and it's just way too easy and convenient for us to say, oh, well, if you're just willing to make a lifestyle change, then everything would change and everything would be great and we'd all be in perfect health. And it's that same sort of dismissive judgment of a person who's suffering with some whatever concern that really kind of gets the provider off the hook, right? Like if this, if some provider is going to say, if that, and it's the same thing if we're going to be the type of dietitians who assign meal plans or assign calorie goals or whatever it is, then it's so easy for us. And it's the same thing with the whole entire diet industry. Like if we can blame our customers, our clients, or the folks who are receiving this, whatever it is that we're doling out, if we can, if we can take responsibility for the successes, but dish out blame for the failures, then, that's a pretty sweet spot for a provider to be in. But it really leaves kind of those of us who are consuming healthcare feeling really frustrated. And I did struggle with that for a long time. And I think it has kind of informed the way that I treat my own clients, is that I really don't ever want to be in a position to say, well, if this isn't working for you, then it's because you did or didn't fill in the blank.
Isn't that the great thing about a non-diet approach, though, is like there really is no one right way to do it. And if someone's feeling like, man, things aren't functioning well for me, I'm feeling chaotic, I'm just feeling off, it's not, you don't blame the necessarily quote unquote diet. You just, it's like, okay, well, we clearly haven't settled into a really great routine or approach or thought, self-talk around these things that we potentially can. So let's keep exploring, let's keep learning. I mean, that's what I love about when someone comes to me and says, oh, I've totally failed, or, oh, this isn't working, or, oh, I'm so discouraged. It's like, okay, great. That's good to know that particular way isn't going to work for you. And maybe we can revisit that idea later, because maybe it might with a little bit of tweaks with your self-talk, or a few tweaks with when you go to bed at night, or your job. Maybe your job's too stressful where you just can't handle grocery shopping every week, or something along those lines,
right. And using I like to use the phrase, let's see what happens. Mm-hmm. Let's try X or Y or Z and let's see what happens. Encouraging this curiosity as opposed to judgment about what the body is trying to tell us and what the body is doing with what we give it. I just think that that's a really important component of, for me, a successful therapeutic relationship.
Do you wish that there was more of that with your own experience? Like, is that sort of part of why you approach things the way you do?
Well, sure. I mean, I still, there are all kinds of things, parts of my story that, I still find little kind of whispers and messages here and here. Well, if you'd only tried this, or if you'd only done this, and it's still, I ended up having multiple major surgeries to address this issue. And I've, lost a lot of time, and I've, endured a great deal of pain and time literally flat on my back when I couldn't be, it was a setback in my career because I couldn't, work for a lot of that time. And, I've lost a lot. And it really gets under my skin to hear these messages of this kind of dismissive, like, oh, well, and not even necessarily towards me, but to other people who are having similar experiences. Oh, well, if you'd only tried this, or, oh, well, this diet changed my life, or, I cured myself with whatever.
Yeah.
It's really kind of triggering for me personally to hear those messages. And I just really get my back up on behalf of people who are hearing those messages, because the people who are sending those messages just literally have no idea what that lived experience is like, and what, like somebody in my situation, what I wouldn't have given to avoid all of that pretty intense pain and suffering. And to have someone just come along and just dismiss it and walk away.
Why didn't you think of this?
Right, exactly.
Well, and that's such an important parallel to what we're talking about here. Is that's honestly the way that people in larger bodies often feel whenever they seek healthcare, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like in every encounter.
It makes me so angry.
At the ER, at the PCP visit, with the nurse, with the dietitian. I mean, how exhausting to live your life that way, That just gets me riled up big time. Like, that needs to end. We need to check our weight stigma, our biases. And I love this idea of radical respect, because it does inform or basically uninforms you of any type of assumptions about who a person is and why they appear the way that they do on both ends of the spectrum, right? Someone in a smaller body too. You don't know what they had to do to get there. And that's actually one of the advantages of having my job, that I tell a lot of clients this. I have sat across my desk and my table in my office with so many people in thinner bodies who go to some extreme lengths to be there. And they appear to everyone else that they have everything together and they're happy and they're functional. But then they tell me in their quiet moments, I'm binging, I'm struggling in this way, I'm struggling in that way. And it's like, it just helps me as an individual, as a regular person, to just suspend any judgment. When I look at a person, I don't know if their life is great, if it's hard, what they're doing to have that body, whether it's one end of the spectrum or another, or right smack dab in the middle. We just don't know. And we do so much damage when we just try to kind of look at people and assume that we understand anything about them. We do damage to ourselves, because maybe we don't make friends with amazing people who we could have if we didn't do that. We do so much damage to each other, because we all absorb that narrative from age 2 on. And it, when you were talking about all this time and energy and effort that people do to maintain these certain bodies, it's just like, it just keeps us so small, and it keeps us from doing the things that we should be doing with our time, like being creative and making discoveries and working hard and learning. It's like, it just occupies so much of our brain space that it keeps us from accomplishing what we could have otherwise. And that really gets me riled up too. I don't know where I'm going with this. What are you thinking?
No, absolutely. Well, I'm actually thinking that I want to make the point that I am very much in favor of allowing experts their expertise, and for respecting the extensive education and training and mentorship and practice that healthcare providers go through to be where they are, and that includes dietitians and physicians. I'm not in favor of marching into the doctor's office with your degree from Google University and telling him all of the things that you're now an expert on that you can that you can teach your doctor about. Certainly, absolutely, and this is a huge part of my own story that I can't fully get into right now, but you absolutely have to be an advocate for yourself. I mean, and long story short, I had a particular doctor that was really kind of a dead end for me, and I had to seek out a new doctor pretty far out of town for me, and I've had to travel a great deal to see the right provider. So I am, a walking example of being an advocate for yourself and finding the provider that's right for you. I do think it needs to be said that we have to, we need to have respect for once we've found that right provider, to not think that there's some simple substitute for the years and years and thousands of hours of training and education that these folks have completed to get where they are. But I think as healthcare professionals and providers, we have to take responsibility for this ethical obligation that we have to not let that expertise trump the respect that we owe our clients and our patients, and the attention that has to be afforded to the lived experience of our patients and clients.
People first, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important distinction. Okay, so that's super interesting to hear about how, your own lived experience has informed your professional work. Tell us about some of the good things you've seen come from that approach. And my listeners will probably be familiar with a lot of these ideas because we do talk about this quite a bit on the podcast, but I always love hearing, why this is beneficial, and maybe if this is someone's first time being exposed to these ideas, help connect sort of what this does on a practical level for people. And you can talk in general, or you could talk specifically if you wanted to, but let's just hear why do it this way.
One of my favorite experiences that I have with clients, and this has come up a number of times, is if I'm having a conversation with someone who maybe has been a chronic dieter her whole life, or she's just kind of for years and years has felt a lot of shame about her body, and is maybe just kind of looking for that next answer about, okay, I've tried all these different things, but now I really want the right answer, and tell me what to do, and I really want to finally just fill in the blank, lose the weight, or whatever it is that person is seeking. And I just sort of gently challenge some of those assumptions that we were supposed to want to manipulate our bodies, like we were talking about before, and kind of how would it be if we just focused on how you're feeling, and if we could kind of move into a place where you just allow your body to be what it is and make the choices that you make based on how to care for the body that you have instead of trying to change it into something else. And that can be really kind of wild and mind-blowing for some people, but what I really love to hear is this relief that people finally feel permission to let go of all that, because it's for so many of the people that we see, it's literally been years or decades even of this feeling of an obligation to hate our bodies and to try and manipulate them and to keep fighting and trying to finally conquer this enemy that we have in our body. And it's just continues to be a losing battle, and people just get more and more unhappy, and they lose more and more time, like you were talking about, just that they could have been focusing on things that really matter and things that bring them joy. And when people get to that point where I, as kind of a voice with some authority, give them permission to just stop and start pursuing a life, and that they have permission to start pursuing a life right now. And given whatever limitations that they might have in their lives, from any number of factors, let's figure this out, and let's figure out how you can start living a life that is meaningful to you right now, as opposed to, once I've lost the weight, or once I've, finally successfully manipulated things the way that I feel this obligation to do, there can be such relief in that permission to let that go. And it's, I see the same thing when I'm talking with families with young kids who are concerned about their kids eating. That's one of my areas of specialty, and there's so much pressure, going back to the whole parenting thing, to have our kids eat perfectly and do all the things that they're supposed to be doing if we're going to be considered successful parents. And not to say that I'm not really passionate about child nutrition. Like I think, feeding our kids well is very important. But I think that a lot of the kind of minutia that we worry about when it comes to feeding our kids is not worth the anxiety that we devote to it. And so when I kind of give parents that permission to kind of back off a little bit, relax, let's figure out how we can introduce some structure and some order into this whole dynamic with feeding a family, that will allow you to really just kind of relax into a pattern that's functional for the family. The relief that I hear from clients is so sweet.
That's another example of radical respect, right? Where you're radically respecting your child's own autonomy with, you're in charge, right? Like the Ellen Satter division of responsibility, right? Like, that you have some responsibilities and that the child has some responsibilities in the feeding relationship, and giving parents permission to back off on the things that are the kids' jobs can be a huge source of relief, for sure. And when you were talking earlier about some of the benefits and positive things you've seen, I kind of had this visual pop into my head where I think a lot of people see dieting as synonymous with healthy eating, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we need to bash that. Like, they're totally not the same, like, for so many reasons, and we should probably have an entire podcast about that. But a lot of people see it in this way, where dieting is on one end of the spectrum, dieting/healthy eating. And then on the other end is sort of free for all. I've given up on my diet, so get everything in that I haven't been eating and eat it in large quantities, and screw it all. Don't think about it at all, right? And people often are just bouncing in between those extremes. And so when they hear someone like us say, hey guys, don't diet, they're like, whoa, what? You don't want me to eat healthy?
Right.
And I think what we're trying to kind of get across here, and what I'm trying to get across in this entire body of work in the podcast, is like, no, healthy eating exists somewhere in the middle. And it's maybe a little bit different than your healthy eating, Katherine, and that's okay. Like, we all have a different place where we fall, and we all fall in different places on different days. But it's not a choice between healthy eating and crazy eating. It's just functional, appropriate, mindful, aware of what your body is experiencing, heeding and honoring those cues, with sort of a gentle knowledge of, hey, how do I get some balance in here so that things function best, and so that I feel my best, and so that I have energy? But also, how do I enjoy that fun day out with my family and not stress about food the entire time? So one of my last questions for you is, I know sometimes we kind of try to avoid specifics because it tends to kind of put things in a box, and maybe has the potential for people to like glom onto this, like, oh, well, Katherine said this is what I should be doing. But I think the benefits of talking specifically and practically outweigh the negative things if we do it in a responsible way. So what is a day sort of general outline of what like radically respectful approach to nutrition and food and body? What does that look like? Could you give us an outline? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here.
Gosh, I mean, I think you kind of nailed it when you said that it really depends on the person. I think that some combination of hunger and appetite awareness, which I think of those as two different things, right? I mean, if you are hungry, like if you're a person who is starving, like if in a food insecure sort of way, you might find some cans of condensed soup. And if you consume a few cans of condensed soup, like you're not going to be hungry anymore. But as a person, who has adequate access to food, if you eat a can of condensed soup, unless that happens to be what you're really hankering for, your appetite is not going to be satisfied from that. So I think being aware and respectful of your own hunger and appetite cues. So both, how hungry are you and what are you hungry for? And what will, with the knowledge of yourself and how your body works, what is going to be the most actually satisfying for you. Combining those kind of sensitivities with some gentle knowledge about nutrition, which can be as simple as, I know that if I only eat carbohydrate for breakfast, I'm going to be hungry an hour later.
Totally.
And I don't want to be hungry in an hour. So
I'm going to eat an egg with this.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
Just like making those decisions about, and another one for me, which, kind of coming full circle with the peeing example.
I'm so glad that's run through this whole conversation.
I mean, so I'm a coffee drinker and I love my morning coffee. It's like one of my favorite things about my day. But I know that, as I get older and, having had 2 children, that if I drink a second cup of coffee, I'm going to be peeing every 20 minutes, like halfway through the afternoon. And as much as I might enjoy that second cup of coffee, and as much as I may want to drink a second cup of coffee, if I'm, dragging or, if I just, feel like having another one, I have to have that awareness. Like, okay, if I know that if I drink this, I'm going to be peeing every 15 minutes through the, for the next 3 hours. And sometimes that might mean still making the decision. Like if I really just want it, I'll just, go into that decision with that knowledge and, just go for it and deal with the consequences. Or it may be that, okay, I've got a lot of work to do today, or I'm taking my kids to the zoo or whatever it is. And I can't be peeing every 15 minutes. So I'm going to hold off on this other cup of coffee. So I think it's really comes down to just kind of allowing yourself, if you know your body well, to respect and have that sensitivity in making those decisions. And if you're in a place where you don't feel very well acquainted with your body in that sort of way, to proceed in a way that you free yourself to become acquainted with your body about those things.
To
do
pay
that through
curiosity, right?
Absolutely. Curiosity rather than judgment. Notice what happens when you choose this versus that, or when you eat when you wake up in the morning versus a couple hours later.
That's what I was going to say, is like your example of the 2 cups of coffee and the consequences that you experience, and kind of weighing that, and sometimes it's worth it and sometimes it's not. I think that's exactly how food is too, right? Like, I love Chipotle, you guys. I always have. And sometimes it's worth it to eat the entire burrito, even though I know it makes me a little too full. Like, I just love the end of the burrito. It's the best part. It's all juicy and like sour creamy and delicious. But then other times it's like, you know what? I know I have dinner plans tonight. I want to make sure I'm hungry for that. So I'll order, this instead, or maybe I'll cut it in half, or maybe I'll whatever. And I think that there's the ability to practice that decision making where you're kind of doing what's in your own best interest, sort of like you would in any other situation with someone you care about. You try to like come up with a way to make it work the best for everybody involved. I think there's a way to do that with food that doesn't involve like rules about like, oh, this is good and this is bad and this is right and this is wrong. It's sort of like all food can be good and bad and right and wrong in different situations and in different amounts and for different reasons and intentions, right? So it's sort of like elevating above these really oversimplified rules and just saying, what's right for me in this moment? And thinking ahead, hey, what's this going to feel like in my body? What's this going to do for me? And sometimes it's worth it to kind of be like, who cares? Whatever, entire burrito. Other times it's worth it to just say, you know what? I'm going to make a different choice today because of, lots of different reasons.
Well, and I think parenting is another really good metaphor for exactly that. Like I'm thinking about my kids have a bedtime, and I try to get them in bed by whatever hour at night, most nights. But this past weekend, there was this super amazing outdoor festival with all these cool activities, and there was an outdoor movie, and my kids, we ended up all kind of staying out a lot later than we normally would. And I was really kind of fine with letting bedtime fly out the window, because we made a really fun memory together and had a really good time. And sometimes it's just worth it. And I think that we can feel some flexibility and some freedom to take those individual circumstances into account when we're making those decisions. And the same applies when we're talking about how we care about our bodies. It's the same for as sort of any sort of activity, physical activity regimen. Like where our body's going to feel like doing different things on different days. And if we allow space for that, that's where we can really learn how to care for our bodies responsively and respectfully, as opposed to like, this is what I do every day, and this is what I'm going to do, and I don't care if I'm tired, and I don't care if I didn't get enough sleep last night. Like, this is what I do because it's no pain, no gain, and I'm just going to impose this agenda and these rules on myself and on my body and on my life, no matter what. And that's, kind of how I show that I'm committed. Well, that's not really how life works.
Right. That is so true. And what you're saying about the example of the bedtime thing, I think it was in everyone's best interest for you to just let that go out the window, because gosh, sometimes you just have to have fun, and it's summertime and all of that stuff. But it's also usually in everyone's best interest to have that bedtime. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, people are grumpy, including you, and you don't get time alone and all of that, right? So it's sort of like this delicate dance or balance that I think it's easier to see in some areas, like with parenting, and a little bit harder to see sometimes with food, especially because we're surrounded by this culture of good and bad and right and wrong and should and shouldn't, and it's really just not that way. And you end up driving yourself crazy if you really, attempt to follow that perfectly. That's it's just not the way it works, and it's not realistic, and it's not respectful.
Right. Well, and with that perspective, I think it's kind of essential to understand that balance is going to look different for every single person, and that, those decisions on a daily basis are going to play out differently for different people. And we have to allow people the space to balance those decisions in whatever way feels authentic and functional for them, without kind of coming in, well, I would have made this decision here, or I would have, chosen differently that day, or I would have taken my kids home because that's irresponsible to keep them out late, to follow that metaphor. But I think one of the most important parts of our jobs are to empower people to feel the freedom to make those decisions and make those judgment calls and feel confident in them.
Right. And also, like you said, I liked when you said with a voice of a little bit of authority. That's sort of how I feel my credentials as a registered dietitian really, really are helpful in these conversations, because I'm not just some like wishy-washy therapist who's like, whatever you want, it's all good. Like we have these credentials and there's science to back it up, and it's not wishy-washy. It's not out there. It's not woo-woo. It really is just a great way to live life, and just a good way to find that freedom around food and around areas of self-care. So, I think that there is an advantage to hopefully hearing this message from two registered dietitians who feel strongly that nutrition is an important thing, but also, health. We want to zoom out on the big picture of health, and there's so many other areas that deserve time and attention and effort and nurturing, not just nutrition. So as you're kind of navigating that's just an important thing to keep in mind is, let nutrition be a slice of the pie, wink, wink, and then have other slices of the pie so that you have this whole circle of what's important to you and what makes you feel whole and well. And don't let anything take up too much space. Otherwise, ironically, you don't end up very healthy or well. Mm-hmm. So, Katherine, last question for you. If you could just tell your prototype that you talked about earlier, if you could just sit down with someone and just be like, this is what I wish you would know about nutrition or about health or about self-care or body image, any of those areas that we talk about on this podcast, like what would be your message just sort of summed up?
Oh, I love that question. I think what I would say is that your body is a good body. All bodies are good bodies, and all bodies have a wisdom that we don't possess in our conscious minds. That every single thing that your body does, everything that your body, every way that your body responds to all of the input that it's given, be it what you eat, what you do, how you sleep, the climate that you live in, the relationships that you engage, like every little bit of input that your body receives, it responds to, and it responds in a way that cares for you and that loves you and that wants you to thrive and stay alive. Your body absolutely has your best interest at heart, as kind of cheesy as that sounds. But, you know, we as a human species, we're in the business of survival. And every response that your body issues it has that agenda. It has that bottom line that it wants you to survive, and it wants to create a system in your body that supports survival. And I think, you know, we talk a lot about body image, and that can be kind of this hazy concept about self-love. But my favorite way to talk about body image is to really think about your body as this machine that really wants to work hard for you. And when, you know, if we are yo-yo dieting or whatever it is that we're, you know, doing in our lives that we think are, you know, supposed to make us, quote, healthier or make some meaningful change that we have decided we want to make in our lives, and say, if our body responds in the way that's the opposite of how we want it to respond, which is, you know, what we see in a lot of folks who are doing dieting, trying to lose weight. A lot of times they end up trying to gain weight. Well, that's your body.
They end up gaining weight, not trying to gain weight.
Oh, sorry, gaining weight.
Yep.
They end up gaining weight. Yeah, my fault. That's your body trying to take care of you. And if your body perceives that there's this, you know, threat of famine or starvation, it's going to really build up the resources because it wants to make sure it's using this just really sophisticated wisdom to try and keep you alive and take care of you. And I think when we start to really think about, you know, even when we get sick, when we get a high fever, like that's our body trying to fight infection. Like all of these mechanisms that our body has are meant to protect us. And I think when you start really thinking of your body in that way, I find it to be easier to, you know, help clients relate to this idea that your body is not the enemy, that your body can actually be, you know, a really, really powerful ally. And it sort of offers, I think, a bridge to that sort of more positive body image that I think can be, again, kind of a hazy concept for people. But I guess that's the message that I would want to impart to people, that your body is not an enemy. It's a partner.
Yes, I love that. That is such a great way to sum up what we've talked about today, and also such an important message for people listening to hear that all bodies are good bodies, and that, you know, you've been fed this lie your whole life of ignore bodily cues, ignore what your body's saying, ignore appetites, and guess what? That's not right, and that's not true, and
it harms us.
And it harms us, yeah. And it's so easy to see how it harms us in other ways. It's hard to see it with food because we're so steeped in this culture, but if you're ever kind of a little bit confused about these concepts, think about any other natural mechanism of your body and think about what happens when you manipulate it or when you try to change, you know, how you do things from a natural perspective. Like
denying basic needs.
It harms you.
Yeah.
If you deny basic needs. Exactly. Thank you for helping me with that. So I think everyone listening can see why I'm friends with you, Katherine, because you're freaking awesome. Don't you guys love her? She's so great. So thanks so much for being here. And just take a minute to tell the listeners how they can keep in touch with you and how they can contact you if they'd like to.
Absolutely. All my contact information can be found at my website, which is www.kznutrition.com. That's KZ for Katherine Zavodny, kznutrition.com. And you can email me from there or, contact me.
Follow you on social media from there, right?
Yep. I'm on Facebook at Katherine Zavodny, MPHRDN. So come see me there too.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Katherine, for this awesome conversation about radically respectful nutrition and health. And I've loved it, and I hope people got a lot out of it. I'm sure they did.
Oh, it was really fun to talk with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.